I think we are ready for Joe's presentation. So we've heard a little bit from Joe. Now I've kind of tapped him for a couple of more in-depth answers and more technical answers on things. So Joe has been Joe has been with the center for 20 years now. He started working almost solely on the image database. He's now the associate director for the center and the co-director of the Southern IPM Center. So take it away, Joe.
Thank you. It's been a long, long road over the past 20 years of getting to where we are now. And as everyone's mentioned multiple times now, it's always about where do we need to go next? For the amount of work we do for outreach and extension, we're always trying to make our job easier. And by extension, all the people we work with. The IPM Resource Database is a great example of that. We went from, okay, we're doing outreach and extension. Images, got it. Video, all right, we now have a place to have that stored. Presentations, we have a system working for that. What's the next thing every person asks for whenever they make a website? Hey, I'd like to have a list of fact sheets and websites and other clips of things and posters and all these other digital assets that I really wish I could tell people about. And I want this list on my website so they can find the information in my information clearinghouse. Okay, there's a lot of variety there in what you could possibly include. And with that, they're of course going to want to know, did anyone click on anything there? And that's not only from the standpoint of the person that's showing it on their website, but the original author would love to know the traffic to their digital resources. The other part they really want to know is, while I could come back to your website once a week and just look around for new stuff, could you nicely slap me in the face with it and tell me, hey, there's new content for exactly what you were looking for? And then if I want to include that in my outreach websites and other places, I don't want to have to copy and paste a whole bunch of stuff. Could I just one button click and it shows up on my website? This was the thoughts we kept going through when we were building out the resource database. And this is the benefits of being involved with some really cool groups. My other hat is one of the co-directors for the Southern IPM Center. And that's all about how do we do adoption and facilitation of information with IPM? How do we get this information out to different groups? Being part of that leadership has given me more opportunities to advance where the programs go here. We're currently hosting 114 websites. 28 of those are information clearinghouses, 32 are working groups that all want to do the same stuff of here's my images, here's presentations, here's all this stuff. How do we work with this? And from that, once that stuff's been made available, all right, we built this new functionality because we're working with the IPM centers. This is a funded program through USDA NIFA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture. If it wasn't for the crop protection and pest management program and the regional coordination section of that, that's what's making these tools available to absolutely anyone that wants to use them. It gives us time to do training. It gives us time to do some modifications to this to meet their needs. And that's where all of this is coming out of, is from working through these programs. So, and then choosing how we're going to get the information back to it and where we settled on the resource database, our first use was, all right, well, we're going to have different fact sheets and booklets and other things people are going to have. We got a title. We know who published it. We have a type of the resource. There's always going to be a description. And some of those descriptions will be a novel. Some of those will be much shorter. You're also then going to have possibly multiple versions of these different things. You're also going to want to list all the contributors for that resource. And then the settings that it applies to. Does this belong with pecan, vegetables, hardwood pests, general entomology? What are the actual subjects? What area of the world does this resource apply to? So these are all things that we built into the resource database as we were working with it, because all those are linked. If I want to see more of what we have available for pecan resources, I click on that. Here's the pecan resources. Where it starts getting exciting then is the number of resource types. And I started off by saying, oh, there's a lot of different types. There you go. 3D printer models. It's a digital asset. We have a group that was saying, you know what? People want these 3D printer models. Could we host this somewhere? And rather than building an entirely different system just for each of these types of content, it's possible to just pull this together and provide those things there. We also combined, as you saw on the previous slide, and as I'll show you again in a second, formats. For one particular resource, I may have multiple formats that apply, and I'd like to keep those all together in a tidy package. This is a heck of a list we have here. When we come down to what we currently have in the system, a lot of fact sheets and a lot of PDFs. So that question of accessibility, oh yes, it wakes me up at 3 a.m. and we have these thoughts about how do we deal with all this archive content? How do we check things going forward? How do we make sure that anything we're telling people, the resources there, are something that are meeting the standards? We do everything we can to make sure we're staying in compliance, and we'll always make it better from that point going forward. As I mentioned, for any one resource, this is actually an example of the 3D printing. These are soybean leaves you can 3D print, and it's giving you an idea of the amount of defoliation of that soybean leaf, because that helps with rating diseases in the field. Okay, would you like the G code, STL, or OBJ file? How do you want this thing returned back to you? Other ways people start using versions, and this was with the Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources. They want to go ahead and make the previous versions of this fact sheet available. So if you want to see what was being said back in 2016, you could go do that. With this, we also have unique links that are going to each of these versions. This then comes into that tracking that we've been talking about, because you want to know the impact of what you're doing. Each one has its own links. This I'm just aggregating in. I didn't mark the versions out here. This is just for the resources that are being looked at. And then I click on one of these, like the Kogon grass fact sheet, and I can see, okay, well, there's 5 hits from UGA Extension. There's some from Google. There's some from Georgia Invasives. I can see this one piece of content I put in the central warehouse is being delivered out as needed to multiple places. This is what we were aiming for. You'll also know that those numbers don't add up to the previous large number I had. In a lot of cases, Refer is being blocked by new browsers and what browser extensions people have on for privacy. We're working on ways to make sure that we can at least track what system these things are coming from to still get some of this data back to the end users. If you put a resource out there, you want to know how much it's being used, and you'd really like to know where it's being used from, just to inform how you're going to do your future outreach and extension projects. In terms of what's currently in the database, there are 4,400 some odd publicly available digital resources, heavy on fact sheets and websites, but a number of other things. And you can see the number of subjects, typically taxa, but other concepts like abiotic disorders, nutrient deficiencies. Those are all different subjects for us, because non-living things affect our management as much as the living things do. Just a lot of folks involved in pulling all this together. And we're providing out the statistics on those views. There's also a whole section that we have that are privately available. For most of these cases, that privately available is because for our own taxonomy that we use within the Bugwood systems and referencing other places where we got lists of species, we include that in the resource database as well. So when we're citing certain things, we have a resource this goes back to if anyone wants to be able to find it. Many of these, once we add the additional data we would need to make these publicly available, will join that list of additional resources. In other cases, we might not have the permissions to be distributing some of the PDFs or journal articles or other things we've been given. In those cases, they stay back in that private section. And for those that have access to those private collections can then get to that content. All that's handled through how the system manages the different resources. Again, this is all functionality based on needs of our users. We don't sit up dreaming new ways to make our lives complicated. We wait to actually see how people want to get these things out there and then work with them to make that as easy as possible. This does get into how we extend this content, and Debbie gave already a glimpse of this. This is me signing up for alerts for content. I've got one in there for Spider. If there are any resources on Spider in Georgia, let me know about it. I then go to my alerted content, and this says, oh, here is a previous fact sheet that came out. I select that. I go down and pick the collection I want to add that to. And if there's a website that then is showing that collection, here it is. I have all the power with just a click to get these things put out to the places I need to have that information. It is still reliant on data entry. And that's where it comes to our group. We have to work with folks. Things go faster when we know it's related to a funded project, but we still try to get through all the different resources, collections, images, everything that people have asked us for. Where I get really excited is where I have complementary efforts. Soybean Science for Success, Gulf South vector-borne diseases, not so much overlap. But you can see we're using the exact same type of technology to, all right, here's your listing of resources. Here's where these things are. This is how you get to your content and get everything tracked. All that data, we've been harping on this for a while, then comes back to the user so I can see what's going on. We also have administrative views. This is all the stuff that the Bugwood group itself has done data entry on. We've been helping to get through this stuff and make it available. And this is where when we do have groups like USDA APHIS Identification Technology Program, Colorado State, Cornell, Penn State, Ohio State, have come on and said, we'd like to be administrators of this just like you. Sure, sounds great. Let me bring you in. We need to do some training on the backside, but they get access above and beyond what our general users get because they want to go through and help curate a lot of this information that's coming in. They've got the manpower and the time to do it. We're happy to support the platform and let them in. And it does make some fun complications for managing things, but it's not all us doing the work here. We only have 14 staff. That's not enough to do this for every possible community that's out there. So we have no problem extending this for those groups that actually want to work with us to make this better. For all of our systems, these are not closed systems. Debbie showed briefly the ability to add a resource. This is again from Connect, where we are going to centralize all of our stuff for just general users to upload content. Someone comes in and fills out the information for a resource. This then gets submitted up to our administrators to look at, make sure all the data is in there right, make sure there's nothing malicious or nothing crazy about this, and then make that available and have it added to the resource database. There is also the option to do a bulk upload for those that just have a strong affinity for Excel and file folders and want to pack it all into a package because you already had something. And how do we do a migration to make this available? There's instructions and ability to work through that. We're always looking for more partners to make this stuff happen. With our staff and our group, we have our funded projects. Out of the 14 staff we have, 12 of that is grant funded. So it's really hard sometimes to find that spare time to add things that aren't necessarily on our projects, but it ends up getting worked out eventually. With that, I think we've got time for question and answer before we actually go to a break.
So Joe will start with a question that's actually in the chat because it's not quite a question. But Gerald Holmes says, I don't see quote blog on your list, but I suspect Bugwood could accommodate this type of content too.
So we've just listed that right now as website. We haven't broken website into the many possible things website could be. But yes, blog is something that we have a rule right now. Anytime someone suggests a new term, you also have to come up with the definition for the term and how it differs from the rest of the resource types that are in there. So we'll take that one and work with it, Gerald, because we just added podcast a few weeks ago because someone said, I think we should have a list of all the podcasts. And there's not a really good way to separate that out. And with a podcast, I could have multiple versions. Here's the website for it. Here's the RSS feed for it. So it's, yeah, all kinds of fun stuff to deal with. Any other questions before we're a little over time, but we got a pretty good break coming up here. So.
Oh, Christina wants to know, how do you add a new publisher in Connect?
So adding a publisher in Connect, the fun thing about Connect, the resource database, it's all users, organizations, publishers are people too. We click the button that says add publisher and we add them in. It is literally that simple. It's just a matter of going in and adding that information. The part that I would love to get into that I never have enough time for is, all right, I've added a new publisher. I really wish that publisher would go in and fill out their profile. I'd love to link to them. I'd love to know more things about them. That's a level of engagement that we're moving towards, but it's going to take some dedicated time and effort. The 3D printer model, someone would like to know where that is located. Give me 1 second. There aren't many of them yet. That group, it was actually a group funded through the North Central IPM Center that was going to look at 3D printer models and a number of other fun concepts. I will give you a URL in a second. There we go. So if you're looking for 3D printer models, mainly in soybean, because it's really what they were focusing on. That is a direct link into the resource database. There are 12 3D printer models that have been released by Crop Protection Network. The main workers on that were Adam Sisson and Horatio Lopez Nicora out of Ohio State. They've really been trying to get these things out there for people to work with. Is there a section for native species, plants or insects? So, for every subject, we've heard us use the term subject in relation to images, resources, videos. EdMap's occurrence data has subjects, is what was reported. We don't necessarily have a section specific to native. However, when we go to a page for a subject, if we know the nativity, we do end up listing it. That's where we get into, again, how while we don't have plant images as a website, we have invasive.org and we have weed images. No one said, unless we're talking about the native alternatives to invasives, which we have websites for that. No one said, well, can we just do it all native plants? And another fun topic for when we have enough food and beverage to encourage that discussion. What is native versus widespread versus cultivated versus we don't know if it's native, but we're pretty sure. Great conversation. I love having that with botanists. They're a wonderful group to work with.
And so seeing no questions at the moment, um, any questions anybody asks over the break, we will address when we reconvene. For now, we are going to take a short break. We're scheduled to be back at 3:40. It's 3:40 now. So we are going to reconvene at 3:45, which gives you 5 minutes. And I'll see y'all back here in 5 minutes. Thanks.